At exactly 1:47 in the morning, a masked and armed intruder approaches the front porch. It is the exact digital timestamp marking the terrifying moment an elderly victim is physically removed from the safety of her own home, from the face of the earth, leaving behind an impossibly clean slate and a growing sense of absolute dread. When traditional investigative methods hit a devastating brick wall, police are forced to look beyond the physical world and dig directly into the invisible data streams surrounding a crime scene. The complete lack of physical evidence inside the house meant that detectives had to rely entirely on digital forensics to reconstruct the hidden events of that terrifying night. And what they uncovered deep within the system logs was a revelation so shocking it completely altered the trajectory of the entire investigation. While the human witnesses were fast asleep and the physical crime scene remained deceptively undisturbed, a relentless stream of invisible data was quietly logging the exact timeline of a nightmare. The most critical piece of evidence did not come from a bloody fingerprint on a wall or a muddy shoe print on the expensive carpets. It came directly from the heart of the victim herself. Between the camera dying at 1:47 and the pacemaker losing its signal at 2:28, there is a chilling gap of 41 minutes. Nancy Guthrie was dependent on a sophisticated medical pacemaker designed to meticulously monitor her fragile cardiac rhythm and transmit that vital health data wirelessly. This advanced medical device was constantly communicating via a local Bluetooth connection to a specialized hub securely established inside her residence. It was a digital tether, literally keeping her alive and continuously reporting her status to medical professionals. But when forensic technicians finally extracted the encrypted connection logs from that specific medical network, they discovered a chilling anomaly that froze the blood of every single investigator working the case. At exactly 2:28 in the morning on February 1st, that vital Bluetooth connection violently dropped and completely vanished from the network logs. This was not a random software glitch, and it was definitely not a temporary internet outage caused by a routine system update. The digital architecture of that specific medical device is incredibly precise and absolutely unforgiving. It possesses a strictly limited and clearly defined operational radius. The only possible way for that continuous Bluetooth signal to instantly terminate is if the physical device, what exactly did an armed predator do inside that locked house for nearly an hour? Itself crosses over the invisible boundary line and abruptly exits the established transmission zone. That singular line of code buried deep in a sterile spreadsheet is the most horrifying piece of forensic evidence in this entire mystery. The severed connection at 2:28 in the morning was the precise, unalterable digital timestamp marking the exact second an 84-year-old woman was forcibly removed from the safety of her home and dragged out into the cold, dark night. Investigators did not need a human neighbor to peek through their blinds and witness the abduction happening on the street. They did not need a barking dog to wake up the neighborhood and alert them to a violent struggle occurring in the shadows. The advanced medical technology embedded directly inside the chest of the victim essentially acted as an unblinking and entirely objective witness to her own terrifying kidnapping. Her heart monitor silently reported the exact moment she was taken away. This staggering revelation completely rewired how detectives approached the mysterious disappearance. It definitively proved that she did not just wander away confused in the middle of the morning. How do you subdue an 84-year-old woman dependent on daily medication? She was deliberately extracted from her meticulously secured environment during a highly calculated and incredibly specific 41-minute window of opportunity. The sheer coldness of extracting this horrifying truth from a simple Bluetooth connection log is absolutely mind-blowing. The realization that a medical device designed solely to preserve human life ended up serving as the primary forensic witness to a brutal crime is deeply unsettling. If this unprecedented level of digital forensic analysis is blowing your mind right now and you want to follow every shocking twist in this ongoing investigation, make sure you hit the like button and subscribe to Shadows with Liam. We are going fundamentally deeper into the dark intersection of true crime and modern technology. But even as the pacemaker data conclusively established the abduction timeline, it created a terrifying new mystery that paralyzed investigators. The digital log could only tell police exactly when she was taken across the threshold of her home. It could not tell them where she was going, and more importantly, it could not tell them who was carrying her into the darkness. The identity of the predator orchestrating this surgical strike remained unknown, hiding within the blind spots of the digital perimeter. Without leaving a single drop of blood or a solitary sign of a struggle behind. With the devastating 41-minute window firmly established by the cold data of the pacemaker investigators, immediately pivoted their focus back to the only piece of visual evidence captured before the digital blackout occurred. The Federal Bureau of Investigation painstakingly analyzed the fractured security footage salvaged from the doorbell camera just moments before its connection was violently severed at 1:47 in the morning. The grainy black and white video offered a fleeting but absolutely terrifying glimpse of the suspect stepping out of the desert shadows and approaching the front porch. The figure captured on the lens was heavily masked from head to toe, obscuring any identifying facial features or distinct physical characteristics. Furthermore, the suspect was undeniably armed and moving with a deliberate, practiced efficiency that immediately ruled out the possibility of a desperate amateur looking for quick cash. The terrifying footage confirmed what the pristine crime scene had already suggested to the seasoned detectives. This was not a chaotic home invasion gone horribly wrong. It was a targeted military-style extraction executed by someone who had clearly studied the specific vulnerabilities of the property. The physical crime scene left for investigators is completely pristine and utterly terrifying in its perfection. The absolute precision of the attack forced the authorities to immediately evaluate the closest circle of trust surrounding the victim. In almost every single abduction case featuring this unprecedented level of intimate access and sophisticated planning, the primary suspect is historically someone deeply embedded within the family structure. Detectives zeroed in on the last person officially confirmed to have seen her alive. Her son-in-law, Tommaso Cioni, became the immediate focal point of the intense preliminary investigation. He was the one who drove her back to the affluent desert enclave at 9:50 that night, and he possessed detailed knowledge of the sophisticated security layout protecting the massive residence. However, the intense scrutiny directed at the family yielded absolutely nothing but frustrating dead ends. The Pima County Sheriff Department subjected him to rigorous questioning and meticulously cross-referenced his detailed alibi against independent witness statements and secondary data points. The official investigative findings completely exonerated him from any involvement in the terrifying disappearance. There are no fingerprints on the walls. There are no forced entry marks on the heavy wooden doors. Authorities publicly and definitively cleared the entire family, stating unequivocally that they were not considered suspects in the highly coordinated abduction. This absolute clearance of the inner circle fundamentally shifted the entire dynamic of the desperate manhunt. When you completely eliminate the family from the suspect pool in a highly targeted crime, you are left staring at a far more terrifying reality. The federal agents realized they were not hunting a jealous relative or a greedy acquaintance hoping for a quick inheritance payout. They were actively tracking a highly sophisticated external predator who had somehow acquired intimate knowledge of an 84-year-old woman living in a strictly guarded community. The unknown suspect knew exactly where the specific exterior cameras were positioned on the property and precisely how to instantly disable their video transmission capabilities without triggering a massive neighborhood alarm. They understood exactly how to bypass the heavy wooden doors without leaving a single microscopic scratch or forced entry mark on the expensive locks. And most disturbingly, they knew how to quietly subdue and transport a fragile elderly woman who was completely dependent on the silent witnesses. In this case are not human beings who heard a scream, daily medication, without leaving a solitary drop of blood or a messy sign of a violent struggle in the immaculate living room. The terrifying realization slowly washed over the entire investigative task force assembled in the Incident Command Center. The masked figure captured in that fleeting doorbell footage was an apex predator who had executed a flawless ghost operation right under the noses of an affluent and heavily surveilled community. As the desperate search stretched into the unforgiving daylight hours, the federal agents found themselves fighting a ghost who understood the modern digital landscape just as well as they did. They were locked in a high-stakes game of chess against a faceless adversary who had calculated every single move with absolute precision, leaving the authorities with a terrifying empty house and an agonizing race against a ticking clock. The meticulously planned nature of this brutal attack meant the suspect was already several steps ahead of the pursuit and fully prepared to leverage their terrifying advantage against a desperate. The only witnesses we have are the cold and unfeeling digital footprints logging data in the dead of night. The sheer audacity of targeting the high-profile mother of a prominent national journalist demonstrated a level of calculated confidence that deeply unnerved the most experienced criminal profilers working the case. They were not simply reacting to a crime scene, they were dissecting a meticulously architected nightmare that completely bypassed the most advanced home security systems available on the commercial market. The terrifying reality was settling in that whoever orchestrated this abduction had the intelligence to vanish without a trace and the absolute ruthlessness to carry out their sinister plan to the very end. The investigation into the chilling disappearance hit a bizarre and deeply confusing turning point when the alleged perpetrators finally initiated contact. In a typical kidnapping for financial gain, the established protocol is terrifyingly straightforward. The captors reach out directly to the frantic relatives using encrypted messaging apps or burner phones to establish a secret line of communication. They demand total silence and threaten immediate violence if law enforcement is brought into the delicate negotiations. They tell a story of a surgical extraction that feels more like a military operation than a random home invasion. The ultimate goal is always to secure the illicit money as quickly and quietly as humanly possible. But the suspected mastermind behind this sophisticated desert extraction completely ignored the standard criminal playbook. According to reports from National Public Radio and local real estate publications, a series of typed letters suddenly materialized. These letters contained explicit demands for millions of dollars in ransom. However, these extortion messages were absolutely not delivered to the desperate relatives waiting agonizingly by their personal phones. Instead, the purported kidnappers bypassed the inner circle entirely and sent their multi-million-dollar demands directly to major news organizations. This inexplicable decision to immediately involve the press transformed a covert abduction into a highly public media spectacle overnight. According to a former Federal Bureau of Investigation agent who reviewed the emerging details for National Public Radio, this specific communication strategy is considered highly unusual and incredibly counterproductive. The expert opinion highlighted a glaring and dangerous contradiction embedded right at the heart of the suspect's supposed master plan of a quiet suburban home and deliberately severs the connection to a doorbell security camera. Every single digital log points to a highly calculated crime. Broadcasting a ransom demand to television networks and national newspapers guarantees maximum exposure and immediately triggers a massive coordinated federal response. It fundamentally destroys the secrecy required to successfully facilitate a massive cash drop. Why would a shadowy figure who went to such extreme lengths to avoid detection suddenly crave the brightest possible spotlight? The suspect demonstrated the terrifying capability to bypass sophisticated physical perimeters without leaving a trace. Yet this same supposedly brilliant tactician chose the loudest and most chaotic method imaginable to ask for the money. This glaring discrepancy tore a massive hole in the primary working theory of the case. It forced detectives to seriously reconsider everything they thought they understood about the motives driving the faceless intruder. Was the demand for millions of dollars actually the primary objective, or was the incredibly public nature of the extortion attempt designed to serve as an elaborate smokescreen, masking a much darker intention? The bizarre choice to involve the press suggested that the perpetrators wanted the world to watch them execute this crime. The digital footprints in this case tell a chilling story, but the physical evidence left behind might completely rewrite everything we know. They wanted the terrifying narrative broadcasted on the evening news programs across the country. This psychological pivot from a silent ghost in the night to a highly public extortionist created a paralyzing paradox for the authorities trying to anticipate the next tactical move. It is a psychological puzzle that continues to baffle the greatest minds in criminal profiling today. When a suspect deliberately breaks the logical rules of their own criminal enterprise, it usually means they are playing an entirely different game than the one they are presenting to the anxious public. The terrifying possibility emerged that the ransom letters were not a genuine negotiation tactic at all, but rather a cruel misdirection intended to waste precious investigative resources while the real objective was quietly achieved in the shadows. The former federal agent emphasized that kidnappers who target high-profile individuals generally understand that time and absolute secrecy are their only real tactical advantages. By alerting the media, the alleged perpetrators effectively invited an army of investigative journalists to join the intense hunt alongside federal agents. As we dive into this terrifying timeline, you need to subscribe to Shadows with Liam as we track every single forensic update in This reckless invitation drastically increased the mathematical probability of their eventual capture. It is a staggering level of operational risk that completely contradicts the surgical precision demonstrated at the pristine crime scene. A suspect who wears a full face mask to hide from a security lens does not logically turn around and announce their ongoing crime to the entire nation, unless the announcement itself is a critical component of their twisted, overarching agenda. The psychological dissonance between the flawless physical extraction and the chaotic public extortion continues to heavily haunt the seasoned investigators. It leaves them actively questioning whether they are dealing with an incredibly sophisticated criminal syndicate running an advanced psychological operation, or a highly capable but deeply erratic individual who suddenly panicked and deviated from their own meticulously crafted plan. The agonizing uncertainty surrounding the true overarching purpose of the widespread media letters keeps the entire investigation permanently suspended in a state of terrifying ambiguity. The federal authorities are essentially blindfolded, actively trying to negotiate with a manipulative phantom who completely refuses to speak directly to the desperate people actually holding the requested ransom money. Unfolding investigation, because the details of this abduction will make you look at your own security cameras with profound dread. We are actively analyzing every single psychological layer of this baffling extortion strategy. So drop a comment below and tell us what you believe the true hidden motive is behind this incredibly public and reckless ransom demand. While the confusing ransom letters sent the media into an absolute frenzy, the most critical breakthrough in the entire investigation was quietly developing far away from the flashing cameras. The suspect had flawlessly executed a digital blackout and managed to evade every single physical security measure installed on the sprawling property. They believed they had successfully committed the perfect crime by controlling the technological environment and leaving absolutely nothing behind for the police to find. But the fatal flaw in their meticulous planning was a fundamental misunderstanding of modern biological science. You can easily cut a wire to blind a surveillance camera, and you can deliberately stay out of range to sever a wireless connection, but you cannot command your own human body to stop shedding its microscopic identity. Amidst the incredibly pristine environment of the deeply unsettling crime scene, forensic technicians scouring the floors with specialized lighting discovered a single microscopic anomaly. The Catalina Foothills in Arizona is the kind of affluent desert enclave where families pay millions of dollars for absolute privacy and total peace of mind. It was not a weapon or a muddy footprint or a discarded piece of clothing. According to verified reports from National News Nation and the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the technicians recovered a solitary, rootless hair. To the untrained eye, a single strand of hair without the root attached might seem completely useless and entirely insignificant. Historically, law enforcement agencies struggled immensely to extract any meaningful identification data from a hair shaft that lacked the vital cellular material concentrated at the base. For decades, a rootless hair was nothing more than a frustrating taunt left behind by a careful criminal. But the scientific landscape of criminal investigations has evolved with terrifying speed, and the suspect was clearly unaware of the monumental shift in forensic capabilities. The Federal Bureau of Investigation immediately partnered with a highly specialized private laboratory known as Astraea Forensics to process this microscopic piece of evidence. Astraea Forensics operates at the absolute bleeding edge of genetic genealogy, utilizing revolutionary techniques that can actually extract viable genetic sequences from the severely compromised and fragmented DNA found inside a rootless hair shaft. This process completely bypasses the historical requirement for an intact follicular tag. The sprawling homes are isolated from the main roads and protected by expensive surveillance networks designed to keep the chaotic outside world at a comfortable distance. The suspect was incredibly careful not to leave any obvious biological material like blood or saliva on the surfaces of the house. They wore gloves to prevent fingerprint transfers and a mask to conceal their face, but they could not stop a single fragile strand of hair from quietly detaching and drifting silently down onto the floor during the commission of the terrifying crime. That infinitesimal piece of biological debris is now the most powerful weapon the authorities possess. The brilliant technicians at Astraea Forensics are actively working to map the genetic sequence hidden within that tiny microscopic fragment. Once they successfully rebuild that complex biological puzzle, they will not just be searching for a direct match in a standard criminal database. They will deploy the incredibly powerful tool of genetic genealogy to map the suspect's entire extended family tree using public ancestry records. This revolutionary technique has successfully dismantled cold cases that remain completely unsolved for decades because it does not require the suspect to have a prior criminal record. It uses the genetic data voluntarily uploaded by their distant cousins and completely unaware relatives to build an inescapable net around the unknown perpetrator. This was the quiet and secure environment where 84-year-old Nancy Guthrie resided. The breathtaking irony of this entire situation is the absolute peak of poetic justice. A suspect who utilized advanced technological knowledge to hack wireless systems and manipulate digital security networks is currently being hunted down by an even more advanced scientific technology that they entirely failed to anticipate. They spent countless hours meticulously planning how to defeat the expensive electronic guardians of the affluent residents, but they were completely defeated by their own biology. The digital ghost who effortlessly slipped through the invisible wireless perimeter is about to be violently dragged back into the harsh light of reality by a single invisible strand of DNA. The arrogant belief that they had outsmarted the entire system is actively crumbling under the immense weight of specialized scientific analysis. This solitary hair represents the ultimate uncontrollable variable in any criminal enterprise. You can meticulously scrub your digital footprint from the internet, and you can burn every single piece of physical clothing you wore during an abduction, but you can never escape the microscopic blueprint of your own genetic code. She was an elderly woman whose daily routine was meticulously managed and completely dependent on modern medicine. The chilling realization for the suspect is that they left a piece of their true identity right in the middle of the room, and now the absolute best scientists in the world are slowly deciphering their name. The invisible biological tether connecting the masked intruder to the horrific crime is pulling tighter with every passing second inside that specialized laboratory. The undeniable power of genetic genealogy is fundamentally changing how we hunt dangerous predators. Make sure you hit the subscribe button right now, because we will be the very first channel to break the news. When Estrella Forensics finally reveals the hidden identity locked inside that single rootless hair, the agonizing reality of the ongoing investigation is that it remains suspended in a torturous state of incomplete resolution. The brilliant application of advanced digital forensics successfully established the exact unalterable parameters of the terrifying event, but it completely failed to illuminate the darkness hidden within those boundaries. The authorities know with absolute mathematical certainty the precise second the security feed was intentionally blinded by the masked intruder. According to official files, she relied on a pacemaker to regulate her aging heart and required a strict regimen of daily medications just to survive. They possess the exact unyielding timestamp, proving the heartbreaking moment the medical implant was violently pulled away from its life-sustaining network connection. These two distinct electronic markers perfectly frame a devastating window of agonizing silence. But the horrifying truth is that everything that actually occurred between those two silent alerts remains a completely unsolvable black box. The advanced technology essentially built a perfect chronological box around the crime, but it left the interior of that box entirely pitch black. We have the absolute beginning and the absolute end of the violent extraction recorded in sterile spreadsheets. But the human suffering that took place in the middle is completely lost to history. The desperate relatives of the elderly victim are forced to exist in this excruciating liminal space between absolute terror and unresolved hope. They are surrounded by brilliant federal agents and the most advanced scientific laboratories on the planet, yet they still go to sleep every single night without knowing where their loved one is currently located. The desperate family must wake up every single morning and face an unrelenting nightmare that offers absolutely no psychological closure. Living in such an upscale neighborhood with state-of-the-art security systems should have provided an impenetrable shield around a woman in her fragile physical condition. They are perpetually trapped in the exact moment the medical device lost its connection, waiting for a phone call that might never come. The sprawling house in the wealthy desert enclave stands perfectly still, functioning as a silent and deeply traumatic monument to the terrifying night when all the expensive safeguards completely failed. The immaculate condition of the interior only serves to amplify the profound psychological torment of the unknown. How does a person simply vanish from a locked room without disturbing a single piece of furniture or leaving behind a single definitive clue about their ultimate destination? The complete absence of physical violence at the scene is a chilling testament to the terrifying efficiency of the unseen predator. It proves that extreme danger does not always arrive with shattering glass and screaming sirens. Sometimes the most devastating threats enter your life with absolute silence and leave without a single trace. The investigators are fundamentally trapped in a waiting game, relying entirely on the microscopic biological evidence currently being processed by specialized scientists. The lens goes completely dark. The digital eye that is supposed to protect the household is blinded in an instant. But Nancy was not just an ordinary resident enjoying a peaceful retirement in the desert. Until the genetic genealogy results are finalized and a definitive name is extracted from that solitary strand of hair, the case remains a haunting masterpiece of malicious planning. The suspect managed to exploit the gaping vulnerabilities inherent in our modern reliance on automated security systems. They demonstrated that technology is entirely neutral and can be effortlessly manipulated by anyone who understands its underlying architecture. The lingering question that continues to horrify the community is not just who committed this flawless crime, but whether they are currently planning to utilize this exact same terrifying blueprint to strike again. If an apex predator can successfully execute a ghost operation against a high-profile target in a heavily secured neighborhood without leaving a discernible trail, what is actively stopping them from targeting anyone else? The profound unease settling over the investigation is rooted in the terrifying realization that the suspect won the initial battle of technology and is currently hiding somewhere in the vast expanse of the open country. She was the mother of Savannah Guthrie, a highly prominent journalist and anchor for NBC News. The digital breadcrumbs abruptly ended at the property line, leaving the authorities staring blindly into the unforgiving desert darkness. The chilling reality is that even if the brilliant scientists eventually identified the perpetrator through complex genetic sequencing, it does not guarantee they will ever locate the missing victim. Identifying the monster does not automatically undo the terrifying damage inflicted during the extraction. What this deeply disturbing case teaches us about the terrifying illusion of digital security is absolutely vital for anyone living in a modern smart home environment. The overwhelming reliance on interconnected Internet of Things devices has fundamentally transformed the landscape of criminal investigations. Devices like smart doorbells and wireless medical implants are no longer just convenient tools for managing our daily lives. They have actively evolved into involuntary silent witnesses that constantly record our most vulnerable moments. This investigation clearly demonstrates that digital forensics is no longer limited to extracting text messages from a confiscated cellular phone or reviewing the search history on a personal laptop. That singular connection immediately elevated her status from a vulnerable elderly woman to a potentially high-value target for anyone with dark intentions. Any device capable of maintaining a continuous wireless connection can instantly become the most critical piece of evidence in a capital murder or abduction case. The exact moment a localized signal drops or a specific data transmission is violently interrupted creates an unalterable timestamp that no criminal can easily erase from the cloud infrastructure. However, the secondary and much darker lesson embedded in this tragedy is the profound difference between crime documentation and crime prevention. We surround ourselves with expensive digital surveillance under the comforting assumption that these automated systems will actively protect us from physical harm. But technology is inherently passive and completely incapable of physical intervention. A high-definition camera can perfectly capture the horrifying image of a masked intruder approaching your front door, but it cannot physically reach out and stop them from turning the handle. These advanced systems provide a deeply flawed psychological comfort blanket for families and vulnerable individuals. They excel at recording the precise timeline of a terrible tragedy, but they are fundamentally useless. In the wealthy, quiet streets of the Catalina Foothills, residents often assume that their expensive cameras and motion sensors create an invisible fortress around their families, at preventing the nightmare from actually occurring when a dedicated predator decides to strike. The entire world is currently holding its collective breath, waiting for the brilliant scientists at the specialized forensic laboratory to finally break the silence. The terrifying digital ghost who flawlessly executed this unprecedented nighttime abduction believed they were completely untouchable and entirely invisible to the modern justice system. But their arrogant reliance on sophisticated technological manipulation completely blinded them to the microscopic biological realities of the physical crime scene. The final results of the complex genetic genealogy analysis currently pending on that single rootless hair represent the absolute last hope for uncovering the true identity of this faceless predator. Will an infinitesimal fragment of human biology actually possess the unimaginable power to completely destroy a meticulously architected digital master plan? The answer to that terrifying question is currently locked inside a sterile laboratory, and it holds the ultimate key to solving the most baffling disappearance of the modern true crime era. We will be actively monitoring every single microscopic development in this unprecedented forensic investigation. They trust that technology will watch over their most vulnerable loved ones when they cannot be there themselves. Make sure you turn on the notification bell right now and subscribe to the channel so you absolutely do. Not miss the next critical update when we finally unmask the phantom orchestrating this horrific nightmare. Nancy lived her life under this exact same illusion of modern safety. She trusted the silent digital sentinels guarding her property. But the horrifying reality of advanced home security is that it fundamentally changes the nature of a threat rather than eliminating it completely. A locked door and a glowing camera lens might deter a desperate thief looking for a quick score, but they are absolutely useless against a predator who understands exactly how those specific systems operate. Then the timeline goes silent. For exactly 41 minutes, there is nothing but an agonizing void of information. The presence of sophisticated technology does not stop a dedicated attacker from watching and waiting in the shadows. It merely forces them to plan their assault with terrifying precision. For an 84-year-old woman, living alone with a pacemaker every single day was already a delicate balancing act of health and routine. Her survival was tethered to a digital medical device transmitting steady rhythmic pulses. Her home was an island of supposed safety, bathed in the invisible frequencies of wireless networks and Bluetooth connections. It was a perfectly ordered world where nothing unexpected was supposed to happen. Yet the very technology meant to monitor her well-being and protect her property possessed a catastrophic blind spot. A security system is only programmed to sound an alarm when an unauthorized presence attempts to force its way inside the perimeter. It is fundamentally designed to keep the dangerous elements of the outside world from coming in. But what happens when the system is deliberately silenced before the breach even occurs? No alarms are triggered. No glass is shattered. A dead camera cannot record a face, and a severed connection cannot call for help. The profound tragedy of this affluent neighborhood is that the silence of these advanced systems actively concealed a nightmare. The technology watching over the house was never built to stop a human being from being quietly carried out into the dark desert night. It only documented the exact moments when her safety was completely shattered, leaving a haunting quiet that signaled the beginning of something truly terrible. The false sense of security provided by these expensive digital guardians ultimately dissolved into a terrifying reality when the final electronic pulse faded away into nothingness, leaving only questions and profound dread in its wake. The evening of January 31st began with the comforting predictability that defined her daily life. At exactly 9:50 at night, the heavy automated doors of the garage slowly opened and then closed securely. Her son-in-law, Tommaso Cioni, had just driven her back to the Catalina Foothills residence, ensuring she arrived perfectly safe and sound. Official records confirm this was the absolute last time any family member saw her alive. No frantic calls for help are made to emergency dispatchers. He drove away, believing she was entirely secure behind the locked doors of her modern home, ready to settle in for a quiet night of rest. The hours ticked by without any human disruption to the dark and peaceful neighborhood. The morning of February first broke over the desert with bright skies and total silence. For a woman deeply rooted in her community and strict routine, Sunday mornings followed a very specific and unbreakable pattern. Every single week, without fail, she logged onto her computer at 11 in the morning to participate in a live stream church service alongside her closest friends. It was a digital gathering she never missed. Her faith and her community were the cornerstones of her existence. But when the clock struck 11 that morning, her icon never illuminated on the screen. Her friends waited and watched the digital lobby, expecting her familiar face to appear at any moment. Minutes dragged on and the empty square on the monitor remained dark. But at exactly 2:28 in the morning, another piece of technology registers a catastrophic event. For an 84-year-old woman with a fragile heart condition and a strict medication, schedule any deviation from a rigid routine is an immediate and glaring red flag. A missed appointment is not just an oversight, it is a terrifying warning sign. The initial concern rapidly mutated into sheer panic as phone calls went completely unanswered. The ringing echoed endlessly through the empty rooms of her house, with nobody there to pick up the receiver. By 12:03 in the afternoon, the escalating dread culminated in a frantic call to emergency dispatchers. Relatives rushed to the property and immediately dialed 911 the moment they pushed open the front door and stepped inside. They were desperately hoping to find her perhaps recovering from a minor fall or dealing with a temporary medical emergency. But what they actually found was far more deeply disturbing than a simple accident. The responding officers from the Pima County Sheriff Department arrived at the affluent address with sirens wailing, expecting a routine welfare check on an elderly resident. A medical device deeply embedded inside the chest of an 84-year-old woman loses its Bluetooth connection to the local home network. They secured the perimeter and cautiously entered the residence ready to provide immediate medical assistance. Instead, they walked into a deeply unsettling paradox that defied all logical explanation. The house was completely silent and entirely empty. There were no overturned chairs in the living room and no shattered lamps on the hardwood floors. There was absolutely no blood staining the pristine carpets and not a single solitary sign of a violent physical struggle anywhere to be found. The heavy wooden doors were not kicked in and the expensive windows were perfectly intact. The environment was immaculately preserved, exactly as it should have been on a quiet Sunday afternoon. The medication she needed to survive was still sitting inside the house completely untouched. Her personal belongings remained exactly where she had left them the night before. Everything was perfectly normal except for the horrifying fact that the woman who lived there was entirely gone. That device is a pacemaker. Its sudden disconnection is not a random technical glitch. It was as if the air had simply swallowed her whole. Investigators stood in the center of the living room, grappling with an impossible scenario that made no physical sense whatsoever. You do not simply misplace an 84-year-old woman with a severe heart condition. A person completely dependent on daily medical care cannot just walk out into the unforgiving Arizona desert without leaving a single trace behind. The officers combed through every single room, searching desperately for any physical clue that could explain her sudden and complete disappearance. They checked the closets, the bathrooms, and the garage, but the physical environment offered absolutely nothing but frustrating silence. The house itself was keeping a terrible secret. They were staring at a pristine crime scene that felt more like a terrifying magic trick than a violent abduction. The physical world provided zero answers to the agonizing questions multiplying by the second. The police were standing in the middle of a perfect vacuum where an elderly woman had simply evaporated